Great news today, Zelman. We are interviewing Carolyn Viney, and she is the Chief Development Officer at Vicinity Centres. So really rose to fame, in my eyes, when she became the CEO of Grocon. So that was about 8 years ago, and obviously has gone from strength to strength since that time.
She made some pretty big waves at Grocon when she took on the unions. She'd be one of the most high-profile women in the Australian property industry, if not the corporate world of Australia. So it's going to be really interesting to ask her those questions of how she's kind of rose to the top, self-made, and got some of the top jobs and kept them for many, many years and successfully achieved them. Yeah, so it's going to be exciting to hear what she has to say and how she's getting through 2020 and her advice and how she's she'd be responsible for many of the biggest shopping centers in Australia, and what that means for the retail market and retail industry. I'm going to have all my kids join the interview today, just because it's episode 4 of Lead the Way, and I figured just to take it up and bring in the younger generation, and she can really give advice of how a 2-year-old can progress his career.
Yeah, I think look, for me, the unions was such a fascinating time. I'm really looking forward to hearing about that. Also, like you said, shopping centres, it's such a challenged sector at the moment. There's been a lot of landlord-tenant issues, so really keen to hear how Vicinity have been handling that. And also just Vicinity in general, how are people changing the way that they work? Is Vicinity encouraging work from home? All those things will be really good to talk to her about.
Yeah, and the retail, hello. And the now with what's happening with other major shopping center owners, the tension's on spotlight as to what they're going to do or not do.
What do you do with that vacant space? And will people come back to the shops? We've spoken about that revenge spending before, but we certainly saw it in May. But can it continue, and can that momentum continue? I suppose it comes back to the fact that I guess throughout our careers that shopping centres were seen as fortress-style assets and pretty invincible in terms of being able to hold value and to hold regular income. That has changed gradually over time, but COVID has accelerated change across a variety of sectors, and obviously retail is one of the main ones.
Peter Allen from Centre saying that investors invest into shopping centres for a fixed income and a fixed investment. If they wanted a variable income, they'd invest into the retail businesses themselves. And retailers are saying, well, our business is a variable. We have seasons of sales, and our rents should reflect the variable changes in our performance. So it is an argument that's becoming louder and louder from both sides, and one side's going to have to concede sooner or later. And yes, this 2020 has certainly accelerated these discussions. They're already being had before, but now it's being a lot louder and a lot more relevant and a lot more urgent than it ever was before.
And also, I think the flow on to a lot of other parts of the economy. So people's superannuation being impacted, even sense of place. I mean, I think, anyone with young children does tend to spend quite a bit of time at shopping centres, not just to shop, but also for a lot of the things that happen at them. So, the fact that they have developed into these centres of community in many ways is, could potentially be eroded as a result of very high vacancies if a lot of these issues aren't resolved. Carolyn, thank you for coming on. It's just such a pleasure to have you on. I guess you really rose to a very high profile 8 years ago when you took on the CEO role at Grocon. So clearly remember the time, the woman in the industry. It was awe-inspiring to see you rise to that level. And then you went one step further and you took on the unions, and just such a strong union in Victoria, and obviously very challenging. So, you've been in COVID, we've all been in COVID lockdown for quite some time now. So, looking back at that time, what are some of your reflections as to what happened and how you handled it?
Look, great to be both of you this morning. And they're very generous comments. Thank you. It's interesting though, because everyone has a slightly different recollection of those events, and gosh, they feel like a long time ago now. But I don't feel like we took on the union so much as we woke up one morning and the union had arrived during the night and blockaded the Emporium site in Lonsdale Street.
Remember that?
And it was really about, in some ways, the completely unsexy topic of whether we would collude with the union to not have a proper election for employee representatives, or somehow pre-arrange what the outcome of those elections was going to be. And that was breaking the law. So it was quite simple in that way. Certainly didn't have the vivid colour of police on horseback being brought in by the Victorian government to move the union on. But at its core, that's what it was about. So it was really a decision: do we want to participate? Do I want to participate in breaking the law, or not? But yeah, it seems like a long time ago. It got a lot of attention, and it probably was not a lesson, but it probably reminds us all of, do you want to do the right thing?
You have a top job at Vicinity, who are obviously one of the most high-profile shopping centre owners in Australia, and the press has been pretty vocal at the moment around the code of conduct and how centres are working with their tenants. If I could just ask on that issue, I know we can talk about that for hours, but just one particular comment on the code of conduct. In your opinion, do you think it is fairly spread between landlords and tenants? And would you prefer to have done this without the government's interference?
Yeah, I mean, code of conduct in some ways is asking landlords and tenants to do something that good landlords and good tenants would do anyway, which is work together to make sure that they're both sustainable and that the industry is sustainable. When it started, it was very good at getting landlords and tenants to get together and to sort stuff out. Great. But I think it's had some really unintended consequences. And parts of that is encouraging behaviour that is not at all fair and not at all in line with what the government intended when it brought in the code. But I think my other observation is, in a country like Australia, where the investment appetite both here and overseas has been really about strong sovereign risk, and people viewing Australia as a great place to invest because we don't have kind of retrospective interference by government in private contracts. I think we just need to be careful that the step that we've taken here, where the government is effectively saying, we don't care that you guys have got a contract that you've entered into as well-informed landlord and tenant, we're actually going to interfere with that. The idea that we would take that further and that becomes the thing that we do in Australia, I think the consequences of that just need to be, and the ramifications of that need to be considered very carefully. I mean, at the moment, the industry, the landlords have funded more than $1.6 billion of support to retailers. Like, this isn't JobKeeper where the government is putting out that support. That's private investors, landlords, big and small, some of whom are funding tenants who are actually better capitalised than the landlord. Now, that's not our case, Vicinity's case. We're obviously a large listed REIT. But even so, there's only so much support that we can afford to provide before our own shareholders and investors look at the viability of our business.
On to the future of retail. I mean, one of the things that Delman and I were discussing this morning is that in the US, there are now a lot of investors looking to short the retail sector, the shopping centre industry. There's a lot of people with a lot of negativity around it. I guess, things in terms of that shift to online, it has been going on for quite some time. COVID has really pushed it along a little bit quicker than it otherwise would have. I mean, what's your view? I mean, I guess, you work for a shopping centre owner, and you are positive about the future from that perspective. But I mean, what do you see as the future steady state with regards to that online versus bricks and mortar, and I guess more generally the future of bricks and mortar retail in Australia?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. There's a trend that was already there pre-COVID, and what we've seen during COVID, when people had no alternative but to shop online because those stores were not open, is an acceleration of that take-up of online shopping and people embracing it to a degree that they hadn't previously. Do we think that was going to happen anyway? Yes, we do. We probably think that if that maximum penetration of sort of 17-18% was going to happen over 5 years, maybe it's going to happen over 3. But I think ultimately what we've seen in the states where restrictions have been lifted, and even in Victoria, when we had that little period where we kind of went back to semi-normal, we saw footfall and bricks and mortar sales go back to where they were pre-COVID. And we're still seeing that. So I think the idea that it's one or other, which people love to get into discussion about, it's not that. I think our very best retailers in our centres, they're ones that have embraced omni-channel retailing, where they've got bricks and mortar, but they've got a great online channel as well, and they actually integrate them super well to make sure that they're satisfying their customers, you know, in an interesting and experiential way.
One of those things on experimental experiences, I guess, at shopping centres. I mean, I love at our local regional centre that there's often lots of fun things happening. I mean, what are some of the ideas that you guys have had in terms of creating community and creating fun experiences to really draw people back in?
Oh, look, I think pre-COVID we had a really successful couple of seasons at Chadstone, extending Chadstone's trading hours, particularly on a weekend, by bringing activation and events into the centre sort of at that 3 to 6 to 7 p.m. time slot. And that was all family-based activities, everything from sort of Cirque du Soleil, Carnival type stuff through to world-class magical shows. I don't mean, the guy pulling a rabbit out of a hat. I mean, really beautifully curated events, and then on top of that, we had, as one of the, I think it was 4 or 5 cities in the world, we had the Louis Vuitton time capsule come to Chadstone, with, it being sold out day after day, with people wanting to come in and see that rich history of Louis Vuitton. So yeah, I think the idea that there's things that are unique and different and you can't just get everywhere every day, those kind of things will continue to have really good appeal. But I do think that consumers are more savvy now than they've ever been, and whatever you offer just needs to be at a very good quality. We're part of the entertainment industry in that way, and customers want to be surprised and delighted and entertained.
So in terms of, I mean, you obviously look after new development. I mean, do you think we'll see another big regional centre being developed anytime in the near future, or what's your views as to new construction over the next couple of years?
Yeah, look, I think as much as I am personally, and Vicinity has as part of its strategy a very, very big mixed-use portfolio and aspiration across our centres. And you've seen over the last sort of 12, 18 months in particular, us being very busy lodging DAs to enable a lot of that mixed use. So we're a believer in it. But then I also look at a place like Chadstone that's been looked after strategically very, very well for a long time, and say, if all we had tomorrow was what we have today at Chadstone, would we, if we had our time again, would we do that? Yep, every day of the week. More than $2 billion of sales, 24 million people a year finding their way there, notwithstanding what we just said about online penetration. Absolutely. But I think going back to the comment before around the customer, the offer that you put on the ground in every regard needs to be really, really high quality. And that doesn't mean, luxury or prestige. It just needs to be really well thought through and to match what we see as evolving, consumer trends. I think one of the problems with shopping centres has been both landlords and retailers, for that matter, being way too slow to understand that their customer is changing, and they get stuck with either a centre or a retail mix and offer in a centre that customers no longer want. So it's not surprising that they find themselves online looking at more interesting stuff that they can get either in Australia online or overseas.
Can Melbourne have another $2 billion shopping centre in addition to Chadstone? And to my knowledge, I don't think Sydney has a centre with that sort of performance outside the CBD. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, Chatty, we love to call it Chatty, is one of the top 5 shopping centres in the world, which for the relatively modest population that Australia has is a feat in its own right. It's still valued at a bit over $6 billion in a suburban location in Melbourne. So it's the best centre in Australia by sales by almost, used to be about 80%. It's about 80 to 100% better than the next. So we're pretty happy with that.
I think one of the things, I mean, Chatswood in Sydney would probably, as a combined retail precinct, maybe get up there, but it's not one centre. So, I think that's where Chadstone has been so successful, that you've been able to manage the growth and ensure that, I guess, a coordinated approach. I mean, things like adding a hotel and office space, things that 10, 15 years ago would have been unheard of is commonplace now. And, we are just seeing such a as you said, mixed-use precincts are the way forward.
And I think the point of difference, on a serious note, because of course Sydney is important and we own a number of great assets up there, including Chatswood. But I think one of the differences that really sets Vicinity apart is that long-term view that's been taken, and having a land holding that actually enables you either on the retail side or the mixed-use side to grow the centre over time. And I think when you look at a number of the Melbourne assets in particular, and whether they're ours in Sydney or someone else's in Sydney, typically those Sydney assets don't have the same available land around them in order to expand. So you kind of feel like you're a bit hedged in. We've got a couple of exceptions to that in our portfolio, including at Roselands and Bankstown, and we do have some expansion capacity at Chatswood, but by and large, a lot of those centres in New South Wales have got stuff all around them that's, it's cut off the opportunity for any major repositioning of those assets.
On to just a question around women in property. It's been quite a dramatic shift, certainly since I started my career, in terms of the balance between males and females. But, we still have, although, junior, mid-level, it is getting far more equal, and there's been a lot of work done. We're still not really seeing such a balance at very senior levels. How do you think this should be addressed over the next decade to try and get not just more women, but I guess greater diversity across our senior leadership teams in construction, but also property as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because on the construction side, you kind of understand the history of women not being attracted into some of those traditional feeder roles. On the property side, there's really no justification for that, because it's not like you're out there with a shovel. The idea that needle kind of gets stuck, as you say, particularly at the senior ranks, is not a good image for our industry. And I don't think it's just about women; it's about diversity more generally and being open to different experience. But I think the idea that the light is being firmly shone on that, and that people are paying attention, having the conversation and trying to unpack why is that happening and how do they shift the dial. I think it's great that boards around Australia are really focused on what's happening in their organisation, sort of environmentally and culturally, that's blocking some of those things. So I'm optimistic that people paying attention to the issue and being genuinely invested in wanting to see that change. I think that there was a bit of talk in the talk about that for a period of time without anyone really backing it up with being prepared to do something. I think the tide's turned on that, and it won't happen overnight. But I do think that we're on that journey now, and that's certainly better than just talking about it.
Yeah, I think groups like with Property Council have had a massive impact on that. You've got male champions of change, you've got mentoring programs. But I think that has really helped, and those industry bodies have done a lot to push it forward. It's been an interesting thing to watch, but also quite exciting as well. Just one of the things that's been quite challenging, I think, for a lot of people is the lack of holidays at the moment, and we can't travel overseas, and we can't even travel interstate at the moment. But I guess when do you think we'll be travelling overseas again? And also off topic, what would be your number one destination as to where you'd head off to?
Well, it's funny because occasionally you get like one of those bounce back emails from someone that says they're on holidays, and you think, holidays?
What are you doing?
But yeah, no, I absolutely get your point. And I think for most people in Melbourne, it's not about a holiday, it's just being able to go somewhere, anywhere, even if it's just for a day.
Even if it's 6 kilometres from your house.
More than 5, I was going to say it's more than 5 kilometres from your home. So I think this idea of travelling overseas and how long it's going to be before we're really going to be able to plan a trip and go, I think that's caused us all to think about, well, where do we really want to go and what's on our list? And don't get me wrong, there's a couple of conversations that happen on the couch here about it, saying, oh, what's on the list, where would we go? But I also think it's really brought to front of mind all the great places that we can go to in Australia when borders are open, that are beautiful and that don't put at risk paying for a holiday and then sort of having it yanked out from under you, which I know a lot of people have had that sensation this year. So I am actually looking forward to getting to see more of Australia. We have a 12-year-old and I am, you know, a little bit ashamed to say that she's seen lots of the rest of the world and not nearly as much of Australia as I would like. So I'd love to get up into that top end with her and go through some of those beautiful gorges and but all of that thematic is going somewhere warm, Nerida, after having had a winter in Melbourne and not going anywhere, not even going to the snow.
All of us have created some good and some bad habits during this ISO period. I personally have been running and smoking a fair few cigars. Nerida has been...
I've been eating a lot of cheese shapes, so I can't buy them anymore. They're banned from my cupboard. But how about you, Carolyn? What are your good and bad habits you've developed?
Well, I haven't taken up running or Cuban cigars. I might have been imbibing in a few barbecue shapes.
I'd recommend it though.
Which I think is the same maker, Nerida, is your cheese shape. I'm kind of happy that after years and years of promising myself that I'd do a bit of yoga, because it's sort of so good for you, for someone who sits in a chair for a big part of your professional life. So I did take up yoga, and it's not a purist form of yoga at all. It's on an app, and you know, you can set the time, how long you want to do it for, and all that sort of stuff. So that what I would put in my good habit category. And I'm really hoping I can stick to that when we do go back to life, something like normal. And the bad category is just the amount of TV that we're watching. I mean, for someone who didn't watch much TV during the week, you know, unless the Richmond Football Club were playing and I couldn't get to the ground, but the amount of TV, it's not doing my head in, because there's not a lot of other entertainment that you can have when you can't go anywhere. But we've done.
What are you binge watching?
I'm not sure if I'm prepared to tell you. No, it's not that sinister, but I've fallen for all of the bloody American sort of crap TV. So Yellowstone has been, family viewing. But
I've watched that.
The biggest binge watch has actually been this English program where they've all moved to France and they're doing up chateaus called Chateau, and I've watched 3 episodes a night or something for 7 nights in a row. It's just disgraceful.
Yeah,
I think some of us are going to miss this. Sorry.
What are you watching, Zelman?
I've watched The Spy. I've watched Loudest Voice. I've watched Stissel. I've watched Unorthodox. I've watched, I don't know. Like, it's all becomes one big blur. It's like it's like 2020. It's all one big blur. I don't know what the beginning, the middle, the end of anything.
Yeah, they sound like
you kind of hop between them, and it's
slightly higher quality intellectual options than we're on for a bit of escapism, Zelman.
Sometimes you try to get serious and watch a documentary, and then 2 minutes in, you're back.
Oh, that's fun.
Oh, that's funny.
Caroline, what is the biggest opportunity for the next 12 months here in Australia?
Look, it's hard to think sometimes about opportunity. I kind of feel like incredibly lucky and grateful that whilst we're complaining sometimes about being stuck at home and not being able to do anything, there's people who've lost loved ones and lost their jobs, and all sorts of pain that's been caused as a result, both economically and health-wise, as a result of COVID. But I do think that over history we've seen that some of the darkest economic times have often been met afterwards with the evolution of markets to do things that they wouldn't naturally have done. And I don't think this will be different than that. I think we've seen a whole heap of, new businesses created in this time. And certainly we've seen some businesses or some parts of the sector that weren't doing great. The acceleration of that change has really, whilst it's been confronting, has forced those business owners to make the kind of decisions that they probably would have needed to make anyway, but they need to do them fast time and get through that. And that of itself, I think, is opportunity, because we're not stuck in this kind of period doing something that that's not sustainable, or that's not good, not profitable, and that we shouldn't be doing. So yeah, I'm optimistic that the change of itself is something that creates opportunities for all of us.
Carolyn, thank you for coming on today. It was just such a pleasure to speak to you and to hear about the union issue. That was you played it down. I think you could have talked a little bit more about the horses and the police and all the rest. But it was fascinating to hear, and also just fascinating to hear what Vicinity are up to. You know, it is a challenging time for bricks and mortar, a challenging time for a lot of commercial property owners. But it does sound like, you know, things like a 20-year plan that, you know, you've certainly got the future, a handle on the future, and also a plan for the future, which I think is just so important at the moment.
Oh, thank you, and lovely chatting to you both. Take care, and in sometime soon, hopefully we'll see each other face to face. How exciting will that be?
I know, so exciting.